All right, I'm calling this meeting to order. It's Thursday, August 10th at 5:30. We're here at the COA. Amy Knox is the chairman, and along with
Gary Flaherty, member.
Brian Reynolds.
Joan Gladu Morton. This is recorded. Is anybody else recording? No? Okay. The first thing that I wanted to do is talk about appointing a member to the CPC, and I will do it. But I need to be appointed to it, and we just need to vote on it.
I'll appoint you.
Is on second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of me going back to CPC?
Aye.
Fantastic. So now I can send that off. And tonight, we have a presenter from Wildland Trust presentation, so you are up.
Thank you very much. So I'm Scott McFadden. I know some of you. I know Joan for a long time. Been talking to Mark, so thank you for inviting me. And some of you may not be familiar with us despite the propaganda I just gave you. So quick overview, we're a nonprofit land conservation trust. We're all 50 years old this year.
Wow.
So having a big celebration coming up in a couple months. And we're a regional land trust. That's where we slot in the land trust community. So we cover a pretty large region of southeastern Massachusetts, basically from just south of Boston to the Cape Cod Canal, westerly to Swansea, the Rhode Island line. That's about 52 communities. And we're going to be adding we have property interests in 42 communities, including Lakeville. We have quite a good expanding portfolio in Lakeville. We're adding 2 new towns this year, hopefully, so we'll be up to 44 out of 54. So our acquisitions program geographically, we've had several focus areas for the past, say, 30 years. One is Plymouth. Plymouth is probably known as the largest area, town by area in the Commonwealth. And there are multiple rare habitats, 37 miles of coastline. The rare habitats are coastal plain ponds and pitch pine scrub oak forest. We have the 3rd largest concentration in Plymouth of pitch pine forest in the world, and some of it's in Carver actually as well. Since the mid-90s, we've had a strong focus in the Taunton River watershed, protecting land on the main stem of the Taunton River and also its major tributaries. In 2009, the Taunton was designated a National Wild and Scenic River. And that's help enhance our work and the work of other people who work on land preservation and conservation in the watershed. We've also had a focus on the North River, which is the only state-designated scenic river in the Commonwealth. And then something that, since the CPA was passed, and I know that's part of the reason I'm here, in 2000, one of the biggest parts of our work is working with towns that have passed the CPA to help them implement the open space dimension of the Act. So that's a huge part of the work we do. We also help protect farmland. That's not the biggest chunk of what we do. We don't work in the Connecticut River Valley where there's a lot more farmland to protect, but there's still properties that come up from time to time. In terms of what we look for, and I was talking to Mark about what our acquisitions criteria is. I'll just summarize them briefly. So we look for properties that have outstanding ecological significance. We use, for the most part, the biomap and the natural heritage and all the different information that's available on MassGIS through MassMapper. I assume you all are familiar with MassMapper? It's an incredible resource. You know, when I started doing this work about 20 years ago, we didn't have the information available that we do now. So we can go in, we can find about vernal pools and rare natural communities, and if it's in a water protection district or a zone 1 or a zone 2, there's just so much information there. So that's where we get that information. We look for things like favorable landscape context. Basically, where does a property sit on the landscape, and does it abut other existing or potential protected land? We look to protect hydrological resources of all kinds, surface waters and groundwater as well. We look for properties that can provide passive recreational opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit later about the difference between passive recreation and active recreation. I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with that, working on an open space plan, but we only look for properties that can provide passive recreational opportunities. So I mentioned farmland protection. We value scenic resources. We did a huge project in Hanover 2 years ago. It was one of the most iconic landscapes in Hanover. And perhaps the thing that people in that community appreciated most about this property, it's called Sylvester Field, was its scenic beauty. It's 600 feet of frontage on a town scenic street, stone walls, shade trees, looking down on a field that goes all the way down to the Third Herring Brook. So scenic attributes is something we look for. Archaeological and historic considerations, we value those. That's not our primary focus, but we do value those considerations as well. And then one that we're still grappling with, but it's certainly a very current topic, which is properties that offer climate resiliency. We're looking for ways to try to measure that. The Nature Conservancy has a tool, some of you may have seen, to measure climate resiliency, and it actually gives scores. And some of the Commonwealth's environmental grant programs require you to use that model to come up with scores, resiliency scores for a property. So that's something where we're trying to get our hands around in terms of how it could help inform our acquisitions criteria. Big part of the work we do, because we're a pretty small organization, even though we have the biggest staff we've ever had. We shrunk during COVID, understandably, and we've really ramped up since then. We now have 14 people working in our organization, which is much more than we've ever had before. But the way we maximize our effectiveness is through partnerships. So we partner with landowners, towns, which is why I'm here, obviously, state agencies, Fish and Game, DCR, the State Park Agency, MDR, the Agricultural Resources Agency, other nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, Mass Audubon, regional planning agencies like SERPED. So, how do we partner with CPA towns? And I've spoken with Mark a little bit about this. So there's a variety of ways we can help, and it really depends on what the needs of each community are. Some towns don't need us to do anything except hold the required Community Preservation Act conservation restriction. Other towns are in a different place and they need help with just about every facet of a land acquisition, from originating it to advancing it to writing grants, etc. But the one thing we do in every situation, we work with towns to prepare these CPA CRs. We draft them. We usually handle the negotiations with the Commonwealth. As you probably know, every conservation restriction, in order to be perpetual, has to be reviewed and approved by the state's Division of Conservation Services. So it's a very iterative process. We prepare a draft, share it with the town. Town and Wildlands agrees on a good first working draft. We send it up to the state. It usually goes through a couple review cycles. Other ways we can help. We often prepare CPA applications for landowners. In fact, sometimes we do that quite frequently. So that's a resource, a service we can provide for landowners. A lot of landowners don't really have the interest or the means or the time to put together their own application. We can help originate projects. Sometimes someone may not know a landowner, and we either do know someone who knows them, or we're willing to just make direct outreach to that landowner. We can help bid project tasks, for example, appraisals. Appraisals are a critical part of any land acquisition project, obviously. And it pays to shop. Some towns and some organizations might go out and get one bid. We usually try to get 3. Sometimes the differential in price can be pretty shocking. And none of us have unlimited resources, so at least we don't. So it pays to shop. We can help bid plans of land, often a plan of land, a new engineered plan that's recordable quality is needed. We can help bid that. And also environmental site assessments, which it's interesting. I found we work with a lot of towns. Some towns always get them as part of due diligence when they're buying a piece of open space. Some don't. I don't know what your experience is.
It varies. Yeah.
Variable?
Yes.
Yeah. So often, unless there's nothing really to worry, if there's no obvious concern, in other words, 55-gallon drums or some reason to suspect past contamination, a lot of towns kind of don't bother getting what's called a phase 1 environmental site assessment. I guess it's site-specific, and it depends on how much resources people are willing to dedicate to due diligence like that, because they do cost a couple $1,000s. So, and then grant writing. One of the ways we've really helped communities, CPA towns, is pursuing usually state grants, particularly through the land grant program. It used to have a strange name called the self-help program. Sounded just, yeah, like a AA or something. But the land grant is local acquisitions for natural diversity. The maximum award now is $500,000. And we've usually helped towns in our coverage area every funding cycle with applications. We usually have at least 2 or 3. This year we didn't have any. It seems like applications weren't as numerous as they usually are. And we also help find other potential funding sources, state, federal. and sometimes private. Depending on the project, sometimes we can and do bring private funds to a project for which we will not be the owner. All depends on how significant the property is and whether the property is a good fit and it aligns with the interests of a particular either private individual donor or a foundation. So when we look at a property we've been asked to hold a CPA-CR on, here's what we look for. We look at the site conditions, how is the property being used presently, we look for historical use patterns, we look at the type of user groups that either use the property or envision to use it, we look for signs of trash or dumping, we look to see if there's a survey plan and how good are the bounds. Are there fixed monuments on the ground that you can recover? How good are the boundaries? Whether they be stone walls, iron pipes, concrete bounds, and the like. We also want to try to get a sense of the town's management vision for the property in terms of public access, trails, trailhead parking area, improvements such as boardwalks, kayaks, canoe launches, and the like. We look for potential encroachments as well as existing ones. One of the most common encroachments we see we call backyard creep, and basically that's yard waste, grass clippings, branches, and the like. And for a land manager like us, we have thousands of acres across the region, we deal with a lot of that. So passive versus active conservation restrictions. As probably you all know, the CPA was amended, I think, maybe 10 years ago to add a fourth program area, which is active recreation. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I used to play sports, so that's all well and good. But Wildlands Trust, that doesn't really, active recreational properties and pursuits don't really fall within our purview. So passive recreation is generally defined by activities like hiking, nature study, cross-country skiing, whereas active recreation usually involves facilities, ball fields, tennis courts, basketball courts, and the like. We only hold CRs on lands that are required for passive recreational activities. Our board had just before COVID, our board had a pretty intensive discussion about whether is our mission, basically the question was, is our mission, our organizational mission, elastic enough to encompass holding active recreational restrictions? And our board's answer was no. And because we did have several towns asking us to hold active recreational restrictions. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of places you can go to find an active recreational restriction holder. The town of Kingston did find one holder, which was a youth sports league. But it depends how you implement CPA and whether you use it to buy properties for active recreation. If you do, that's great, but we wouldn't be able to hold the restriction that's needed on a property like that. So the conservation restrictions that we prepare for CPA properties is what generally the permitted uses that they include. And I think none of these will be a surprise to you. Passive recreation, as we mentioned, that includes improvements, not only trails, but improvements like information kiosks and trailhead parking areas. Creating, maintaining trails, placing of signs, vegetation management, forestry, habitat management and improvement, invasive species removal, archaeological investigations subject to the approval of the Mass Historical Commission, placing of fences. So those are generally the range of uses that you can do on there's a few other ones, but those are the core ones. And then prohibited uses. Constructing buildings, billboards, mining, dredging soil, altering the topography, storage of junk, debris, trash, activities detrimental to soil, water conservation, or commercial or industrial uses. So none of these I think would be a surprise in terms of prohibited uses. So one of the things Mark asked me was, are there any costs associated with Wildlands Trust holding a CPA-CR? And there's one, and it's a one-time fee. It's called a stewardship endowment fee. And I don't know, has everybody heard of stewardship endowment fees before? Okay. So in our case, and I think in most land trusts, one-time fee, we have a worksheet that we use to calculate it. And then the reason we charge it, and it's common practice across the land trust field across the country, is that when you accept a conservation restriction, you're accepting a perpetual obligation to monitor. That's a primary obligation of a CR holder, is to come out annually. One of our staff will come out and actually walk the property with a representative of the landowner, primarily to ensure that the terms of the restriction are being upheld. In the very worst case, we've only had to do it once. If a conservation restriction is violated and the landowner, the violator, will not remedy that and cease whatever activities are constituting a violation, we have to defend it. We would have to defend it in court. So that takes money. Hence the need to have a stewardship endowment fund.
Have you had to do that much?
Once. And it was, I won't tell you how expensive it was. It was terrifying.
I'm sure.
We work with terrific attorneys, but can be very expensive. And litigation that gets protracted just eats up funds. And the last thing we want to do is end up in that position. So we go to great lengths to try to mitigate and minimize the likelihood of any violation that would result in litigation. That's the last place we want to go. And one thing about that too, I think it can be helpful, some towns do this, if you build in the cost of a stewardship endowment fee in your project budget when you're working on a land acquisition. So it's not a surprise, or you have to find another way to fund it. And that's really all I have. It's a brief presentation, hopefully more interactive.
I just, now, what was that one-time fee? It's always different, the stewardship fee?
It's property specific, and we have a pretty complicated, pretty detailed 3-page worksheet we use to calculate it. And the main driver of that
Yeah,
is the amount of time we estimate that it's going to, how much monitoring time it's going to take each year to monitor the CR.
oh, okay.
And people ask ranges, generally they run these days from, say, low 10s to, for a big property, 20,000.
Yep.
And it's those funds are put into a restricted stewardship endowment fund. They cannot be used for any other purpose. Staff bonuses,
Yeah.
new truck for me,
Yeah,
new wing in our office.
right.
Cannot be used for anything other
Right.
than stewarding our conservation restrictions.
Right. And is any property too small, you know?
No. Well, it's interesting, sometimes we get asked to hold conservation restrictions on privately owned property, and if we can't find enough conservation values that satisfy our criteria, we have
Yeah.
to turn those down.
Right.
But usually, I can't think of a CPA CR we've turned down other than active recreational CRs.
Mhm.
So if you buy a property, like, I can think of numerous towns that have bought 1 or 2 acre properties for good reasons, and so we hold a CR on them.
Hmm.
So scale is important, but it's not everything.
Right. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions?
No, I'm good.
No. So the question I have
Yeah.
is the land trust fee. So if you are purchasing some property for, let's say, $200,000, can we add the fee to the CPA request? That we go to the and so if, let's say your fee is $10,000 on top of the $200,000 purchase, can we go to our local CPA committee and then town meeting to approve $210,000?
I believe you can. That's a project cost. I mean, there are other project costs
Yeah,
beyond
yes.
those associated with us,
Right.
whether it's appraisals, engineering, ESAs,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Right.
So you should be able to build that in.
Yeah, I've never
And-
heard it being denied.
Right. So you just include it in the budget with the
Right,
the
it's
application
it's
that's
a line
submitted
item.
to the CPC, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
So you help towns acquire properties?
We do, if such help is needed. Again, some
Yeah.
towns don't need, the only thing they need or want us to do is to come in and hold the CPA CR after they've acquired it,
Mhm.
and that's fine. Again, every town's different.
Right.
You know, you have a pretty strong open space committee, which is great to see. You have a town planner, you have staff to work with. Some towns don't have either of those things.
Hmm.
No conservation agent. So those are the towns that often need a little bit more in terms of assistance.
Right. So you actually purchase the property?
Well, we wouldn't do that, but we would fulfill a lot of the functions that town, either volunteers or staff would otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, and that's where the grants come in, trying to help
Right,
acquire property and all that?
right.
Yeah. Okay.
So as far as steps go for an acquisition, so we're approached by somebody or we do some outreach to property owners in a certain area, and one of them is willing to negotiate with us. At what point does the town bring it forward to the CPC for funding and at what point do we have appraisals done, surveys done, the legal work done? So what would be like
Sequencing?
the sequencing of
Yeah.
all of those things? Because we wouldn't really have, unless the select board, they do have some funds that they can release for some of those items up front,
Mhm.
but
Does the Conservation Commission have a discretionary fund to use for,
yes, they have a fund.
they
They
guard
do?
it zealously?
I don't think they've used it for really for too much in the past. So,
Okay. Okay.
um,
Well, I'll frame my answer in the way the town of Plymouth, which has one of the best community preservation committees in the state, handles things. So whether we bring a project to them or the town finds out about a project on its own and brings it to us, the first step is getting the assent of the landowner to file an application with the Community Preservation Committee, and that's where, at least in Plymouth, we come in, we prepare the application. It's kind of a 10-page narrative format we've prepared. CPC seems to like it, and there's some of the CPC's own 2 or 3 pages of kind of pro forma fill the blanks. And we include a lot of attachments such as deeds and maps and plans and any other information we have that would help suggest why that property is worthy of the CPC's consideration. So we look for things in the open space plan. We basically try to make the best case possible. And we also do the best job we can of demonstrating where the property is consistent with the CPC's open space criteria, which there are 10 in Plymouth. So once the application's filed, then what Plymouth does, and all towns don't do this in terms of appraisals, they look to involve the landowner in the appraisal process. I personally think it's a pretty good way to go. Because often if one party commissions the appraisal and pays for it, the other party seems to have suspicions sometimes. Is the appraisal or it's slanted to the party's interest who paid for it? So they look to cost share the cost of the appraisal, and they also want to involve the landowner in, even before paying for it, having a say in what appraiser is hired. And assuming that appraisal comes in, there's negotiations, agreement on price, then it goes to town meeting.
So it gets filed with the CPC prior to agreeing on a price?
Yeah, that's Plymouth. I mean, I don't know what your criteria says.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to, you have to do step A, B, and C
Right.
before.
Because often there's no agreement on a price, that's why the appraisal's needed,
Mm-hmm,
right? To establish a
Be a good idea to get.
platform for
their
negotiations,
okay.
right?
I think we've looked at their steps.
All right, so they go to the CPC for an endorsement of the project
Right.
and to pay for the appraisal? Do
Yeah, well,
they
CPC will
use
usually pay for
some-
half in
Some of
Plymouth.
the administrative funds
And
that are
that's
appropriated
correct.
every year.
Yeah,
So the CPC can release some of those funds to pay for the appraisal
exactly,
without going to town meeting because it's already
Exactly.
been appropriated
right,
for their admin. So
Exactly.
they use that for admin money.
right,
Okay, and for the appraisal and any survey work and stuff.
right.
And then, once they agree on price, then if they like the price, they would vote to submit the project to town meeting, signed purchase and sales.
They'd like to have a
Or
signed
whoever,
purchase and
right.
sale, yep. And what
It
they do
wouldn't be
there,
maybe the CPC, it might be the select board that might sign that.
it's a select board, there's the
Right.
CFOs of the town, and the CEOs of the town that would sign
Right.
the
Mhm.
P&S.
Yeah. Okay.
And what they also do, and again, Plymouth's a little bit different in some respects, that has representative town meeting. But at the same time, what the CPC there does, they take their slate of projects that are going to a particular town meeting to other town boards and committees to get buy-in.
Right.
And I think that's useful too. You know, they go to the FinCom, which is usually or often a tough board to take anything to because they're careful about any expenditures, they take it to the Conservation Commission and other boards.
And then once the land's, say, acquired, then you guys help maintain it?
We don't help
That's
maintain
only-
it. What we do is we work with the town again to complete that Community Preservation Act conservation restriction.
Yeah.
And then our primary responsibility is to come out annually, once a year, to walk the property,
Just to lock it.
to make sure that it's being upheld. We don't have any role in management otherwise.
Yeah.
Town retains ownership, and town retains all the responsibilities and privileges of
Mhm.
ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so post-town meeting,
Yeah.
can you explain a little bit about the next steps? When closing would happen, when how
At
the
least in
steps-
Plymouth, again, I'm using Plymouth as kind of
Right.
my framework, because we
Mhm.
work with them so closely, and that's where we're based.
Yeah,
It's usually 6 to 8 weeks
Mhm.
after the town meeting vote,
okay,
and title gets done.
yep,
Although, will say this, we found this out working with Plymouth. They require any landowner who looks to sell land to them to be able to demonstrate good title. There's been a couple projects that have been derailed because of serious title complications. So it's really incumbent upon the landowner to be able to demonstrate good title. So that's a really important due diligence step. And then any other due diligence such as ESAs get done in that time too.
Could you explain the CR process? Because there's
Sure.
several steps to that, when that
Sure.
would start and when that would be finally approved and completed.
Usually we start drafting a CR when a project looks to have what we would call project certainty. It looks like it's a go, everything's on track for town meeting. Looks like the town is going to get approval to buy it and then follow through. So what we do is usually around that time draft a conservation restriction. We use a template that's mandated by the State Division of Conservation Services, so we're not making it up out of whole cloth. The template changes from time to time, but it's a pretty good template. And we adapt that to the particular property, and then we share it with the town. And it goes to all the people on the town's end who needs to see it, all of you, town council, etc. And once Wildlands and the town have achieved a consensus on a good first working draft, then usually what happens is we send it up to the state CR reviewer with the Division of Conservation Services for so-called first review. And there's some documents that we have to send up with that, deeds and maps, and there's an application to fill out, and so on. And then they review it. Now, you may have heard that there was a huge break in the state CR review process because they had a terrific reviewer in place, but he left in November of '21, and the position wasn't filled for a year, which was disastrous. So what happened was there's a huge backlog of CRs awaiting review that accumulated. They've hired somebody, she's great, I've spoken with her many times. She's really working to whittle down that backlog, but it's still a backlog. Eventually it'll get straightened out. But putting that aside, once the draft goes up there, it usually in normal times gets reviewed within a month or less. They send it back, there are comments, they ask, what about this, what about that, we want you to change this or that. We review their comments, we send it to the town to review the comments. We usually accept the changes that they want and put into the CR, then it goes up for another review. And depending on the complexity of the CR, sometimes there's 2 or 3 phases of that back and forth. Once we get final approval, that's when we obtain final signatures in the document, so there's usually 4 signatories. There's the grantor, which in this case would be the town is granting it. Wildlands would be the grantee. The Board of Selectmen have to sign it. Sometimes the CPA CRs, depends on how the town acquired the property. If it's putting it under care and custody of the Conservation Commission, there'll be a signature page for the Conservation Commission. And then the last signature is the State Secretary of Environmental Affairs. So there's definitely some time and some process. And I've summarized a lot of steps in 3 minutes. But we get through it and it gets done. And we prepare, as part of what we do, we prepare what's called a baseline documentation report. And that's just a collection of maps and deeds and plans and things that basically depict the property that's under the conservation restriction, and photos as well.
Yeah.
And that's a line item on the stewardship endowment calculation fee. It's usually a flat fee of $1,500. It's not a lot. And the town gets a copy of that, and we keep copies as well.
And I guess I'm just trying to understand, if a town doesn't own a piece of property and it's still owned by its owner, but it has CRs, is that able to be sold
Yes.
also? Even if though it has CRs, right?
Yep.
The new owner.
CRs do not prohibit sale of the property.
Okay, yeah.
It just prohibits certain activities
Right.
on a property.
So it just gets transferred to the new owner?
It gets transferred, yeah. One of the reasons, many reasons we like working with towns to hold CPA CRs is that we have what we call landowner certainty.
Yeah,
Town buys a property for open space purposes, CPA
Right.
money, the ownership's not gonna change, and that is a beautiful thing, because
Right.
you brought up one of the most challenging things with holding
yeah.
private CRs, and we have, geez, I think we have 100 of them,
Yeah,
is that the ownership is going to change. We are powerless to have any say in that.
oh,
Prop- right?
really?
No,
Well, I mean, the CR will stay.
the CR stays, but we have no control over who is going to own the property from
Right.
time to time.
Yes,
And so, to remedy that, or to mitigate the likelihood of negative interactions and a landowner feeling emboldened to commit violations, there's actually a clause in each CR that requires a landowner, when they sell a property subject to a CR, to notify the CR holder. They usually never do it, which is another problem, but we usually find out about it, and then we really make an effort to reach out to the new owner of the property. We give them some materials, and we
right.
try to arrange a site visit.
Yep.
And try to help educate them about what that conservation restriction means for their use and enjoyment of their land. Because it's kind of scary, a lot of closing attorneys, they have to acknowledge a CR that's in the chain of title, but they don't often seem to inform their clients about what that means
Right,
for owning and managing the property. So
correct.
that's a little bit of a gap sometimes on privately owned land.
Yeah,
But again, for town-owned properties, that's perfect. It's gonna be one owner. Yes, the faces in the town hall will change, but the
right.
ownership is not gonna change.
Right.
It's publicly owned land that was acquired for very specific conservation purposes.
Right,
It's a beautiful thing.
yes. Okay, thank you.
As far as timing, how much notice do you need? Will you come out if we want to meet with property owners?
Yes.
Negotiate, walk a piece of land?
Whatever
all-
help you
all
need,
those types
we're
of things.
positioned usually to provide it. One caveat, we don't have a printing press in our basement, so I cannot guarantee you a check that we're gonna necessarily be able to contribute anything financially. But there are projects from time to time that rise to a certain level where we can tap into our private fundraising resources.
Mhm.
But other than that, yes, just give us a call. We'll come out. We're happy to help out any way we can. We're expanding our land acquisition capacity. Tess is gonna be working with me on a part-time basis. I've been the sole land protection person for wildlands for quite a while. I'm not complaining, but we cover a pretty big area, so I'm gonna be happy to have a little bit of assistance.
Yeah,
Because I think the assistance would be helpful, particularly for the first few, because
Yes.
since the town acquired Betty's Neck in 2000 roughly, there hasn't been any, and CPA is new here as well, so we haven't done a project yet. We just approved a few small things for other things. So I think the assistance will be, greatly appreciated.
yeah.
I look forward to it. And I congratulate you on passing CPA. I know there were some past attempts.
Yeah,
It's not easy to do. My own town only passed it in 2016, and we've been able to do a couple open space projects left, not that we have a lot left. So it's just an incredibly important resource to have. When you don't have it, that's one of the reasons why you just mentioned that gap between Betty's Neck and the present, and there really hasn't been any municipally driven open space projects in that time, right?
Right.
Well, that's a big part of the reason why.
right. The other question, as you've said, like say we called you to come out and look at a property, and the property may have things on it, like maybe hazardous, you know, and you'll keep an eye out that, or you'll be able to do some sort of testing. I don't know if it's a testing, but you know what I mean? Like, if
Yeah.
the thing, and that's the thing, is that something that you
Hopefully
said?
that's a very rare occurrence.
Yeah.
It has happened. When that happens, that's a big red flag,
Yeah,
and that usually puts a pause in everything.
yeah,
And then everybody on the conservation side has to take a deep breath and say, ooh.
yeah.
And usually landowners get very skittish about that too.
Mm-hmm.
But before, I would say this, before you would really want to move ahead with pursuing a property like that, I think you'd want to ask the landowner to get some testing done.
Mm. Yeah,
If there's anything really overt or really
Right.
that looks troubling,
yeah,
you know, that's when they would, I think it would be the landowner's responsibility to get a so-called phase 1 environmental, or phase 2
mm.
environmental site assessment, which would involve some soil testing.
Okay.
Because you never know, I mean, properties that, let's say, are owned by out-of-town or out-of-state owners, no one's around to manage it. I was just talking with the daughter of a landowner with whom we did a conservation restriction project in Freetown, and we started working on that a long time ago. When I first went out to the property, it was on Forge Pond. It was a dumping ground.
Oh, yeah.
Now, nothing real hazardous, but there was trash and auto parts and brake drums and buckets of used motor oil. And it had been a place where people could pull off, I think it's Richmond Road,
Mm-hmm.
sight unseen, cross the railroad tracks,
Yes,
and free
yes.
rein. So those kind of situations do happen. Now it got cleaned up and we have a CR on it and all ended well.
Oh, that's good.
But the landowner did have to go through that due diligence process and did have to pay to get it cleaned up.
Right,
And then to curtail access too.
yeah.
That was the last problem, to put up there was some kind of gate that was installed. Because that's a worst case scenario, to have a absentee landowner
Yes.
on a property that has enough access to facilitate all sorts of illicit activities. Hopefully you won't come across that though.
No, I was just asking questions.
But it's
'cause I know
possible.
sometimes
Yeah,
that can
I mean,
happen.
it is within the spectrum of
Yeah,
considerations that we have to acknowledge could be there,
yes,
you know?
right. So, yeah, thank you, you answered my question on that one.
Yep.
I can't think of anything else.
I have a question.
Sure.
What involvement do you have with historical and archaeological resources?
They are features we value. They're in our acquisitions criteria. They're not the core mission, though. They're not the core of what we do, but we certainly value them. And if a property that we're working to preserve has them and we're able to identify them, we will help craft, if it's a conservation restriction or if we own it, we will take great care to preserve those resources and to find out more about them. Whether it's working with, is it PAL, Public Archaeology Lab, are you familiar with them?
Yep.
They do archaeological and historical investigations. So we do value those resources very much.
Okay.
And one other thing to add to that, we have some evolving new relationships with Native American constituencies in the area.
Right.
There's a native-run land trust down on the Cape called the Native Land Conservancy, and we know, done a few projects with them. So we certainly will seek to engage their wisdom if there's a property that probably may have Native American significance.
Okay.
Are there other things that the land trust does besides working on helping towns acquire property and or holding conservation restrictions on properties?
In terms of acquisition or beyond acquisition?
Just beyond what we've talked about, is there other things that the land trust does?
Yes, we own 6 or 7, I don't have the numbers in front of me, 6,000 or 7,000 acres of land that we're responsible for, so we have to steward that. We have a huge conservation restriction portfolio. We have a huge presence now in the city of Brockton. One of my colleagues is running a multi-year huge project there to help revitalize DW Field Park, which is a 700-acre beautiful. I live a couple towns away and I had no idea it was there. It's been there since the 20s or 30s. So we have kind of if you will, an urban component to what we do. Stewardship, we actually do stewardship, we have a fee-for-service component in our stewardship department. My colleagues who do that are actually working on a big project for the town of Stoughton, building boardwalks on a Stoughton conservation property. We do programming. We had, before COVID, we had 4 nights a week of programming at our headquarters in Plymouth. We're trying, slowly building that back up. So this, beyond land acquisition, there's quite a broad scope of what we're working on these days.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we've acquired quite a few property interests up in the Leonard, Washburn, Pocoy Brook area,
Mhm.
south and north of 44.
Yep.
So we acquired a piece from the Stryer family at the end of 21.
Mhm.
We acquired a parcel some years ago from the Lewatchko family.
Mhm.
We had a small parcel called Richmond Woods, and we acquired the CR on the Lakeville Nursery property.
Oh, yeah.
And I also found, and I gave a copy of the plan to Joan, the town actually was granted a conservation restriction on a parcel up right next to 44, right next to Mucky's Liquors in 2008 or 9. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I know where it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So all these pieces surround a large parcel that's 110 acres owned by a gentleman named Mr. Sopa. And it's kind of the keystone piece in this landscape, and I wonder if you've ever had any contact with him, outreach to him?
No, not that.
Have you
Not
looked
that
at
I
that
know.
property? I think, not that you need to have me start giving you priorities, but that's something put it this way, that's something that we're very interested in at Wildlands, and trying to explore preserving. Because it's really the, pass this map around.
Yeah.
So it's that one?
Yeah.
So that's what we acquired from the Stryer family. And the Sopa property kind of sits in the center of this landscape. It's a headwaters for Leonard Washburn Brook, Pocoy Brook.
Yeah, I know where it is.
Thanks. So some years ago, we sent a letter to him. I think he's in the Mid-Atlantic region. We didn't get any response. So I don't know if anybody knows somebody who may know him or...
I've met him.
Oh, you have? Isn't he a dentist?
I know he's a medical person. I thought he was a surgeon.
Surgeon, okay. Have any idea what his plans might be for that land?
Not really. He's just been holding it for years.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it's in chapter 61 or not.
Can I keep this, or do
Oh,
you need
yeah,
it?
please do. So that's not the only area of town we're interested in, but
Right.
that's a real hot spot for us.
Yeah. Are there other areas you're looking at besides this one? At the-
I think any area around the ponds complex. I mean, we own Blueberry Island, which some of you may or may not know, in Berkshire.
Mhm.
So that's obviously a real ecological hotspot.
Right.
One of our other more recent acquisitions at Lakeville, was it last year? God, time flies. The very upper reaches of the Nemasket, not far after it begins.
Yeah.
We worked with, I'm sure somebody you all knew, Mike Schroeder.
Yes.
And so we did a kind of a hybrid project with her. She gifted 2 acres and we put a deed restriction on the rest.
Mhm.
So that was a nice corridor. She has, I think, 500 feet
Yeah.
of frontage on the Nemasket. Beautiful property if you've ever been there. Or
Mhm.
paddled past it.
Mhm.
So that area, anything to do with the Nemasket is great
Mhm.
interest to us.
I know there's, I don't know if it's your program, but near the cedar swamps, are you guys interested in?
Oh,
going up
yes.
there?
Yeah,
Is
that's
that-
a very rare natural community and
Yeah,
in decline.
yes. Do you have any property over there? Like it's near,
We do, well, we actually have, what we have is beautiful conservation restriction on the Leonard family's property.
Yes.
We worked with Ken Leonard
Yes.
some years ago. I'm
Mhm.
sure you all know Ken.
Yes,
Beautiful.
yes.
Yep.
Yes, I live on that street.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Pierce Ave.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Beautiful street.
Yes.
That's gotta be on your scenic, list of scenic streets. Do you
It
have one in your
is.
open
It
space
is.
plan?
It is. It is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I'd be
so
shocked if it wasn't.
I was just talking about, because now that they're putting the commuter rail through there, right through the swamp, so,
That's a go?
oh, it's already done. The town just came in and redid it. I mean, not
It
the
was
town,
already
state.
an active railroad for freight.
But they
Oh, was
widen it.
Okay.
But they widen it, added more tracks. They cut down a lot of trees. It's very sad.
Yeah, I knew it was controversial. We didn't,
Yeah. But there's 800 acres on one side of it. And I was just.
well,
I
Mass
was-
Audubon
Mass Audubon owns that
owns,
one.
they have, they're a Sonnet Cedar Swamp,
Yeah.
and part of the Leonard property abuts that.
Yep, okay,
Yeah.
Mass Audubon.
So that's a
owns
pretty
that.
sizable block,
Yes.
and there's other landowners there with whom we've spoken from time to time and see if anything comes of that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was you that.
Yep.
But it's Mass Audubon.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you work with them or?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, conservation is a very fraternal business.
Hmm.
It's not competitive, really, for
Right.
the most part.
You're all working for the same thing.
Right, we're all working toward the same goals. We operate at different scales.
Yeah.
We're regional, whereas a group like Mass Audubon covers the entire state.
Mhm.
So they're a much bigger organization than we are. Trustees of reservations cover the whole state.
Right.
And then there are some towns that have we call them one-town land trusts. Rochester has one. I think other towns.
Dartmouth have one?
Dartmouth has one. Dartmouth's one of the
DRT.
stronger ones, and unfortunately, they're not of a piece. They seem to be either really strong like Dartmouth
Mm.
or struggling. We're talking to a land trust right now, a one-town land trust that I won't name.
Mm.
They just reached a point where they don't have diminishing volunteers and resources, and that they're looking to dissolve.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we've worked with multiple organizations. There was a Swansea Land Trust.
Yeah.
We worked with them, they dissolved and then transferred their assets to us. Milton Land Conservation Trust. There was a Brockton Audubon Society, not affiliated with Mass or National. And we have a Brockton Audubon Preserve, and that's from whence it came.
Right.
Brockton Audubon Society was formed in 1920, so it was a pretty old conservation group
Right.
focused in the city of Brockton. So, and you might have a question about our sustainability. If you
Yeah.
do, it's a reasonable question.
Yes.
Our endowment has grown by, I think, $2 million in the past 15 years.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of good financial people on our board, and we have a great director, and they're really working hard to build our financial resources, so we're going to be in a very strong position financially. So we don't end up like some of the smaller groups that we've absorbed, basically.
Right, so you don't have to worry about you dissolving with all this.
No. No, but, put it this way, landowners, when we sit down with at the kitchen table, it's a fair question they ask. They say, so how do we know that you're gonna be around in 10 or 20 or
Yeah.
50 years? And it's a reasonable question. So doing everything we can to make sure that we're on a very solid, sustainable financial footing, and staff footing as well.
Is there something in place, though, if something was to happen?
Yes, most groups like ours, our bylaws specify kind of a pathway in the event that the organization has to dissolve.
Mm.
And sometimes it names potential successors, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would mention is that there are 20,000 registered nonprofits in Massachusetts, and land trusts are a small part of that. But we're all subject to the oversight of the Attorney General's office. So when we worked with these smaller land trusts to dissolve, it's taken 1.5 years. So the main point there is that they really scrutinize all of us. And particularly when a group dissolves, they want to make sure that the people who are doing the dissolving aren't absconding with
Yeah.
resources or money or what have you.
Yeah.
And any kind of self-aggrandizement or self-enrichment.
Mhm.
So I think that's a good thing, is people can count on that we're pretty regulated. We're audited twice a year, so I'd say we're pretty accountable in every respect.
That's good. All right. too.
One thing I should also mention, so in terms of our project review process, it's very simple, three phases. First is staff review, which is mostly me. Second layer is if we deem a property of interest to a project, we take what's called our lands committee out to each property for a site visit. Lands committee is a subcommittee of our board that works with me to review and process all acquisitions. And then the third step in our review process is presenting each project to our board of directors and getting their approval. So, important steps, relatively simple ones. You know, we're not overly bureaucratic, but we do have some approval steps on our end
Yeah.
as well to hold any type of property interest, conservation restriction, owning a property outright, whatever the case might be.
Well, thank you very much for coming
Thank you.
and educating us. And now we have another property to look at.
Excellent, yeah, I've heard a little bit about one of your priority process, so
Yeah,
it's encouraging.
yeah. That's great. Okay, so we're now going to go on to review the status of the
I
open
take
space
these?
plan.
Yes, you
And I'm going
Okay,
to
thank you.
ask Joan how we are doing.
Well, I just gave Amy the last 3 sections that I have from you. I need build-out analysis and the pot pod.
can. Right. Well, the build-out analysis, there is
It's
no.
just that one green paragraph, and this mandatory. It's just that one green paragraph that I gave you that you have to
Okay.
review.
All right,
It's easy, it's in that red
Right
folder,
there?
yes,
and I need the parks pot
yes, okay.
updated, and then that's the last of the text. And I
Mhm.
will sit with you one day and go check out a couple of things that we
Yep.
need to do, get a couple of maps, put me in touch with Serped, and we're good to go.
Okay, sounds good. Next week.
Yay, we're almost,
Mhm.
we're almost done.
We're there, so if you give me those, I'll put them together.
I will do them tomorrow and
Okay, we're good to go.
pass them on.
And I'll get Wildlands Lakeville portfolio, property interest to you soon,
Yeah, and
tomorrow
you're
or
gonna
Monday.
yeah, and you can send me the Wildlands Trust, because actually they're in that
Yeah.
section, there's a note on one of those pages that update Wildlands Trust numbers.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Scott and Tess are gonna send that to me, and then I'll just shoot it over to you.
Oh, great.
One of those little tabs in the land
Yes.
preservation part says Wildlands Trust numbers for
Yep.
CRs. So I'll just shoot
Well,
those over
I'll
to
include
you.
everything because we've acquired some properties outright as well.
Okay,
So it'll be a
because some
complete,
says CRs that are private and some that are owned by you,
yeah,
so it's
there'll be a
broken down.
description of what type of property interest it is,
Perfect, great.
acres, date acquired, and all
Right,
the
and
other
then we'll
basics.
just add it in.
Yeah,
Perfect, great,
Yep.
thank you.
no problem.
Thank you.
All right, thanks,
Thank you.
folks.
Nice to meet you.
Same
Nice to
here.
see you again, Scott.
Yeah, been a while,
Has been a while.
eons.
I've seen Tess, but not you.
Well, they don't let me monitor CRs, they keep me mostly in the office.
You used to be the monitor, now you passed it on.
Yeah, yep. Sticks.
And now we're on to, we're gonna discuss 1 Elliott Way.
Okay, so One Elliott Way is owned by Glenn Cristallini. He approached me last week about possibly selling some of his property to the town. His property is along linear piece along Route 140, and it abuts the Vickers property. I passed out 3 maps that I created from the town's GIS. The first one is, if you look at this one, that's the one that kind of is a big blow up of the whole area. So it shows 2 properties in colors. So the green color is the Vickers property, and the red is Joan Morton's property that has a CR over it. So this land abuts that. Then if you look at the next one, it's an aerial photograph kind of zoomed in of the property itself. So you can see that at the left side of the, there's a bog, and there's a small little pond behind it, and a bunch of woodland. So that is area to that side, kind of the northwest side, he would like to include in the sale. Then there's a big barn, some other outbuildings and his house and a pond. And he would like to retain ownership of about 10 acres around that middle section of the property. And then there's a big wooded area as you drive in that does include a small wetland area. That is the other area that he would like to sell to the town. I've drawn them up onto the third map that's in front of you that shows, they're outlined in blue with dotted easements to gain access to either side from Highland Road and from
Old stone wall.
yes, Old Stone Wall, yes. So currently on the one that's closest to Highland Road, there's a trail all the way through that goes all the way up to the back of that pond. So to make the connection to the trail into Vickers is rather an easy task to do. Apparently there's some headwaters of a couple brooks on these properties. And so, so I thought I would bring it to the Open Space Committee. I already brought it to the Conservation Commission just to kind of gauge their, support for moving forward. That generally the committee members are okay with it, so that we can bring it forth to the select board and for further discussion, and perhaps following up with some of the processes that like Scott had mentioned, in order to further the discussions on whether to acquire the property and for how much. So, it's kind of more informational, just kind of see if you have any questions about the property. I mean, it's a good piece as far as trail connections, making connections out to Highland Road, as you can see if you go to the first map, the big picture map, you can see that there's a lot of open space from Highland Road going down to the Long Pond and into Clark Shores, and then to the north you go through the Vickers property and we're to the that side of Elder's Pond, the west side of Elder's Pond, that we had previously discussed about possibly looking at some acquisitions in that area as well. So it kind of is a piece that runs right through there.
I guess my only question is, he would like to divide off, right, and keep the house and the pond and the barn.
Yes.
So that easement is also a person's driveway eventually, is that right? Or
Well, so the main road into the property is through Elliott Way, which is
Yeah.
on the Highland Road side.
Yep.
So that easement would be owned, that Elliott Way would probably be owned by the homeowner with an easement to the town.
And this area here
Yep,
is wet, wet, wet.
yes.
Yeah,
It's all wetlands. Half the time you can't even go through there.
yeah.
It's so wet.
So I guess that's my only concern is with the new owners. If he sells that house lot, would that be a problem if that's an easement for Lakeville? I mean, I guess that's further discussion if people want to access, right, the parcel and the trail.
Yeah, well, that
Yeah.
would be, clearly, as Scott
Yeah.
said, it would, first off, we would have to be buying this with CPA funds. So
Yep.
therefore, there would have to be a conservation restriction on it, and
Yeah.
and so it would be reviewed thoroughly to
Right.
ensure that there's public access, not just for monitoring, but for
Yeah.
public access,
Right.
because one of the main reasons is besides the ecological value of the headwaters of these little brooks, is the trail connections. You know, and that, you know, if you don't have that, that's, you know, removes one of the key reasons for acquiring this property. So I think the commission even wanted to ensure that there was a small parking area at the end of Elliott Way.
Which end?
At,
On the Highland Road end?
yes, on the
Do you know
Highland.
how deep that is? From,
Yeah, I know, it's,
I think it goes straight down.
Yeah. So
John,
that-
is this
so that
pretty
is-
dry up over here, this other piece?
What about it?
Is that really wet or is that pretty dry?
Well, there's
I
a
mean, there's a
large,
brook, I see.
This whole area is wet, wet, wet.
Right, but what about the other piece?
This is dry.
That's dry?
This is
Okay,
dry,
okay.
but this is really wet.
Right.
They want to put a parking lot here, but have you, I mean, Elliott Way goes way, way down.
Yeah, it's deep
And there was a
down.
problem when the town put in Elliott Way, and there was a problem, the selectmen said they should never have allowed a road, driveway cut, because it's right on the bridge. And people go blasting over the bridge really fast, and there was a problem with it when they did that. But I think there was a problem with Mr. Cornell in the town at the time, but they didn't want to have a road cut there at all, so that's something that you really have to be careful of.
Mhm.
If you put a parking lot right there by the bridge.
Yeah, I don't think it would be quite a big parking lot. I think it would just be a place to park 2 or 3 cars. I don't think, yeah, we would be looking at creating, I mean, and I don't think Wetlands Trust would want us to.
Well, you can only
Construct it.
provide what the area will give you for parking anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm, yeah, that
I mean, we
would
could always
all
just
be-
make it, you have to come through Viggers, and that's
Right.
that, you know?
Right. Yeah, and this parking along Highland Road, actually, if you look at the aerial, just over the bridge, I see cars parked over by that pond that's shown there. There's a big shoulder there, and I often see cars parked over there,
Okay.
so.
So where do you think he proposes to put, where do you propose that the parking lot's gonna go? Here?
Well, no, probably like, you know, where he's already has a little cleared area there before the cell tower. Yeah.
Let's see, so you're meaning way more in,
Right, like right there maybe?
Yeah, it has to be
Like-
toward the end of Elliott Way.
like up in here?
No, that's way too far.
Right in here?
Yeah,
Right
down
there.
in that area there, right around the end of Elliott Way. The trees kind of widen out there, and then he's got a pile of wood chips. So, you know, probably right in that area where it's already cleared and it's kind of past the main wetland area. That wetland area is kind of in that along the right side of Elliott Way, and then it goes in. So, yeah, so that's all I got about that.
Okay, do you want us to take a vote on it?
No.
Or no, it was just a discussion?
No, this is just
Just to let us
an
know the interest.
informal discussion, just to
Okay,
just gauge people's interest.
Yep.
If they want me to follow up, we will, and we'll bring it to the select board as well and gauge their interest in.
yeah. Looks good. All right, and anything on historical commission?
Well, we are planning a walking tour of Thompson Hill Cemetery
That's a good idea.
in the springtime next year. And we're planning on doing a walking tour of Highland Road, and probably a booklet with it. And then after that, we're planning to do, I think, Taunton Street with a booklet. When we do walking tours, we put together booklets to go with them.
Yeah.
So those are in the works. Can you think of anything else, Joe?
That's about what we have going on right now.
And why
Yeah.
did you pick those areas? Just curious.
Well, we've certainly done other areas.
Mhm.
You know, we've done 6 booklets,
Six.
and so these are where there are old houses and old historic sites, and it's appropriate.
Is Thompson Hill the oldest cemetery in Lakeville?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
It has some very old gravestones in it.
Mm. Yes.
We just got a CPC grant to work on the stones at Thompson Hill.
Good. She's
Thanks to
cemetery
the
commission.
Thanks to the CPC commission for that, and Mark for presenting it for me. And listening to Mr. Drollet for hours on end.
Yes,
He knows his stuff.
He really does, though.
That's great. All right. So, does anyone want to make a motion to end?
I'll make a motion, Dan, to
Okay.
adjourn.
To adjourn?
A second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.